The prospects for peace in Ukraine are currently as fragile as a pane of glass. Against this precarious backdrop, Russian President Vladimir Putin's latest address at the Russia Calling Forum has precipitated political turmoil across Europe in both the literal and figurative sense. While affirming that Russia harbors no intent to initiate a broader war, Putin simultaneously issued a stark ultimatum. Should Europe actively transgress Moscow's red lines, the conflict could conclude with devastating finality to the point where there will be no one left to negotiate with. To many observers, this was nothing short of a brazen challenge erected squarely in the geopolitical center of Europe. What warrants close scrutiny is not merely the threat itself, but Putin's framing of Europe's conduct throughout the diplomatic process. By his account, no external force pushed the European Union away from the negotiating table. Rather, they abdicated their seat voluntarily, only to return, claiming exclusion. This narrative has prompted experts to pose a critical question. Is Europe suffering from a crisis of agency, believing itself to be a rule-maker, only to find itself sidelined as a spectator, while Washington and Moscow trade terms over its head? The atmosphere has intensified significantly, with the emergence of the peace initiative championed by U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. Already controversial, this plan is viewed by many European leaders as a coercive trap designed to force Ukrainian concessions. Just as Washington maneuvers to bridge the divide, Europe has advanced counterproposals that Moscow deems fundamentally unacceptable. In the Kremlin's interpretation, these proposals serve a singular purpose: to cast Russia as the spoiler of negotiations. Analysts argue this is Europe's attempt to cling to the moral high ground it feels entitled to occupy. Yet, amidst these diplomatic gyrations, the core issue of Ukraine remains the intractable sticking point. In the operational theater, drone strikes targeting Russian oil tankers in the Black Sea have provoked Moscow to threaten a total blockade of Kiev's maritime access. This is viewed as a game-changing escalation. If Ukraine loses its remaining outlet to the sea, both the military balance of power and the nation's economic resilience will tilt disastrously against it. This raises a spectrum of anxieties. Is this the catalyst for a chain reaction that even Washington will struggle to contain? Further rhetoric from Russia has rendered the situation even more volatile. Putin bluntly stated that Russia reserves the right to target vessels from nations supporting Ukraine if attacks on Russian tankers persist. Strategic experts interpret this as a direct signal to Europe: the risks you are underwriting will not remain confined within Ukraine's borders. If Europe envisions itself merely as a cheering spectator in this contest, Russia is issuing a reminder that the theater of operations can be expanded at any moment. As tensions spiral, Europe finds itself maneuvered into an untenable position by its own internal dynamics. The circulation of a 1,000-page strategic document outlining scenarios for a large-scale NATO deployment in the event of a Russian offensive has led the public to question: is the continent genuinely preparing for a worst-case scenario, or is it engaging in performative alarmism to justify current political choices? The answer, at this juncture, remains dangerously opaque. Repeated assertions from Hungarian leadership that the European Union is entering a phase of preparing for war make it difficult to dismiss the possibility that certain factions are actively contemplating escalation scenarios. Paradoxically, Europe's actions reveal a disconnect. For months, capitals have lamented depleted arsenals, yet they continue to funnel resources into the Ukrainian grinder, a conflict they privately admit has reached a stalemate. According to multiple assessments, European military forces are currently ill-equipped for high-intensity conflict. A recent French military exercise, wherein an armoured brigade required dozens of trains and 10 days merely to deploy, is cited as damning evidence. Should large-scale hostilities erupt, Europe's so-called rapid reaction forces might need to request a schedule before reaching the front lines. This logistical bottleneck is likely just the tip of the iceberg. What alarms public opinion most is the widening strategic divergence between Europe and Washington. Under Trump, the U.S. has made no secret of its intent to retract its security umbrella over Europe, to pivot toward containing China in the Indo-Pacific. Many interpret this as a signal that Washington is unwilling to remain bogged down in a conflict where the costs outweigh potential gains. If the U.S., indeed, executes a gradual withdrawal, Europe faces an existential inquiry. Does it possess the capacity to confront Russia alone? Ironically, as Washington calculates its exit strategy, Europe is making significant sacrifices to purchase continued American engagement, from procuring U.S. liquefied natural gas at premium rates to accepting unfavorable tariffs. These moves are calculated to anchor the U.S. in the crisis. Analysts view this as tacit admission that Europe lacks faith in its own strategic autonomy when juxtaposed with hawkish rhetoric about preparing for war. This dependency raises profound doubts. Meanwhile, Ukraine, the central protagonist, remains entrapped in a bloody stalemate. Credible sources suggest that in 2022, Russia and Ukraine were on the verge of an agreement far more lenient than the terms the U.S. is now proposing. However, when the western wind blew with greater force, Kyiv reversed course. Many now liken President Volodymyr Zelensky to an actor trapped in a script written by external powers. Unable to exit the stage of his own volition, this fuels skepticism toward Europe. If Ukraine had a window to end the conflict but was compelled to fight on, the question arises, who truly benefits from a prolonged war? Is it Europe for its economic interests, the United States for its global strategic calculus, or a convergence of both? No one dares to answer definitively. Clearly, Ukraine's sustained attrition has eroded trust in the moralistic pronouncements of all parties. Viewed broadly, this is no longer a simple binary conflict, but a complex tapestry of strategic calculations. Europe's historical anxieties and Moscow's revanchist ambitions. Each player appears to be withholding trump cards, keeping the regional atmosphere thick with the scent of gunpowder. Tensions are further exacerbated by the Black Sea dimension. Putin's vague allusions to severing Ukraine's maritime routes, coupled with his categorization of drone attacks as piracy, were sufficient to send shockwaves globally. When he warned that Russia could target ships from nations supporting Kyiv, the implications transcended the Russia-Ukraine dynamic, pointing a finger directly at Europe. Is the European psyche prepared for this new tier of confrontation? Europe's greatest challenge lies in its own strategic paralysis. If the U.S. pushes too aggressively for a peace deal, Europe fears Ukraine will be forced into concessions that hand Russia an advantage. Yet, if they appear too rigid, they risk being dragged into an escalation they neither desire nor are prepared for. Europe's current posture resembles a player freezing with the ball in midfield, unable to shoot, yet unable to hold possession indefinitely, rendering every reaction awkward and liable to criticism for lacking direction. While mutual accusations pile up, observers note how the Russian president consistently shifts the onus onto Europe, branding them as the pro-war faction making unacceptable demands. This tactic leads the public to wonder, is Europe truly overreaching, or is Moscow simply redefining the rules of the game to alleviate pressure on the battlefield? If the military situation cannot be reversed, altering the global narrative regarding the conflict's causes becomes a viable alternative. A prolonged war with over 1-2 million casualties lends gravity to every diplomatic decision. When Mr. Putin asserts he does not want war, skeptics ask, if that is true, why do Moscow's warnings escalate tensions week after week? Consequently, the entire region has become hypersensitive. Even the faintest signal can trigger tremors. Another perspective suggests Europe is reacting in a cognitive rut, interpreting nearly every Russian statement as a prelude to escalation, potentially overlooking diplomatic off-ramps hidden within the harsh rhetoric. Deep-seated mistrust transforms every move from Moscow into a perceived trap, creating a cycle from which neither side can easily escape. Although ostensibly silent, the U.S. continues to shape the chessboard from the shadows. The peace plan floated by Washington has left Europe oscillating between hope and skepticism. If the U.S. is determined to freeze this conflict to focus elsewhere, Ukraine may be compelled to accept difficult compromises. At that juncture, Europe will face a dilemma. It must simultaneously protect a close ally and satisfy the superpower that underwrites its security. This tug-of-war renders Europe's stance ambiguous, speaking volumes yet avoiding the most critical truths. Looking ahead, the confrontation resembles less a battle with a definitive endpoint and more an interminable game of geopolitical chess. Repeated threats, stalled negotiations, and accumulated strategic fatigue are pushing the region into a state of inertia. Experts warn this inertia is the most dangerous factor. A minor incident, a misunderstanding, or a kinetic overreaction could cause the entire structure to collapse. Europe appears to have lost its strategic compass, not flexible enough to entice Russia back to the table, yet not robust enough to compel a Russian retreat. Simultaneously, they dread a temporary truce, which might serve only as a respite before a more violent storm. From Moscow's perspective, increasingly kinetic responses signal a refusal to be pressured as before. Yet, if repeated too often, these warnings risk losing their deterrent value and becoming indicators of imminent action. Ultimately, the paramount question remains unanswered: who will seize the initiative to de-escalate, and does either side genuinely desire such an outcome? These doubts hang heavily over the continent, as all options seem to overlap and conflict. Many fear that a crisis at this mature stage rarely resolves smoothly. Even a slight miscalculation could drag the entire region to the precipice of a deep abyss, a destination no one wishes to reach.